How you doing, everyone? Greetings and welcome back to the basement. Now, if you saw my end of year thingy last year when I was kind of coming back after my break, I said that I wasn't going to buy any more retro crap. This year I had more than enough down here to keep me going and, you know, to be repairing stuff that was broken and whatnot, and I couldn't justify buying anything new. But best made plans like that go right out the window when you've had a few beers and you're a little bit inebriated. And that's what happened a few weeks ago when I was in front of eBay and I was just clicking around blindly, having a little look. And what I saw proposed was this Schneider CPC464, and it came with a joystick and a couple of books as well. And the price wasn't too bad, so I clicked on the old buy it now end of it. Now, I was aware from reading it that the system had been turned on. The vendor said that they didn't have a TV cable, so they couldn't say for sure if it was working, but the red LED was coming on, so it was working that far. So me, in my inebriated state, I said, no problem, I'll fix it if there is a problem anyway, you know. But it arrived, and the thing that I didn't notice is that in my state, I didn't really see in one of the photographs that it obviously had been dropped from a height, and the back of the system is missing a big chunk of plastic where it fell very, very, very hard. Now, when I turned on the system, the red leg came on, but I just had a black image on screen, and when I pressed the Del key, which should give a beep in a working system, there was silence. So I decided I'd open it up and do the regular stuff, check voltages and that kind of stuff. And very quickly, I found the source of the problem. And that was thanks to an oscilloscope that was donated to the channel by Tron Magnum. Thanks very much for that. But also, the problem with this was something very, very simple. And the way I tested that was the problem was using a technique that I didn't think would work, but it did. So I'd like to share that with you. And that's the reason that there's a video on this system at all. So what we'll do is we'll take the system out of this nice little box that it came in. We'll have a look at it and I'll do the permanent repair on it right now. Now, so here is the little Schneider. Well, it's not little at all, but here is the Schneider 64K color personal computer, the CPC464. And it comes with its built-in tape recorder. It really is a massive thing. Now, it did get a very hard drop. I can show you right here at the back. You'll see that it's missing an entire chunk of plastic here, and it's all cracked down here as well. And not only that, but all the screws are in it, but in fact, there's only two that are actually holding the case together, because nearly all the little standoffs are broken inside of it. But that being said, I did manage to get this thing working again, but you'll notice play is constantly pressed down on the tape recorder here, and that's not because play is broken, but it's because it's the only way we have to keep this closed. And it came with this cassette here as well, a Schneider presentation cassette. But the only way I have to keep the door closed is by pressing play. There's obviously a little latch or something broken off it, and well, this counter reset thing is completely and utterly banjaxed as well. But there you go. Anyway, this is a German computer. It's got English written on it, but it's pretty much for Germany, I suppose. But yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it apart. I'm going to show you the inside of it a bit, and we're going to power it on and see why it's not working, and then I'll show you how I'm going to fix it. I removed the two screws that are holding it together, and when we open it up, I'll show you here if you can see. Yeah, we've got a keyboard connector on the left hand side, which you'll see better in a moment. But we've also got the connector over here that that actually manages when you flick the power switch and whatnot to turn it on. So I'll remove that first, and then I can remove the two ribbon cables, Mylars, that are going to the keyboard. They should just pull out like that. We'll put the keyboard to one side, but that looks to be in fairly good condition, with the exception, of course, of the tape drive, which seems to be complete, but the door that isn't closing on it. Now, now, the first thing I noticed about the Schneider is that it has loads and loads of plating on it. So it's well shielded. You see there's this top plate here covering the system, and there's also a plate on the bottom of it as well. So what we'll do is this guy just slips up. There's no screws keeping that in place. It just pulls up like that, and we can see the entire board here in front of us. Okay, so here's the main board in the Amstrad, or well, in the Schneider CPC464, although smart Amstrad. This guy here is an older board. I think it's a revision 2 as far as I can tell, because it's got the new gate array here. It's got a place for the older style, but when it comes to the keyboard, it'll only take the ribbon one. The really old boards also had a kind of a pin header that'd take the older keyboards. This doesn't have this. But what we have is we have the new gate array here, and we also have our Zilog processor. Now we've got our ROM here, we've got a sound chip here, and we've got another few chips around the board as well. Now keep it in mind that this board was dropped pretty hard to cause the damage that we see, the broken plastic and the broken standoffs. The board looks to be in fairly reasonable condition. There's nothing that seems to be damaged. So the very first thing I did when I got this was I opened it like this so that I could visually inspect the board to see that there wasn't anything bent or any kind of shorts or any of that kind of thing. And from an initial look like this, there was really nothing apart from a big sack of spider eggs that had been deposed down here, and there was a little insect in it. So I think the idea was once the little baby spiders had hatched, they'd have something to eat. I don't know, but anyway, I removed that and I gave it a little clean, and I just checked around that there was nothing there that could cause any hassle really. And then what I did was I powered it on to see what it did. So we'll do that right now. Okay, so it was easy enough for me to test this system after I had had a look at it, because I just took the cables I have already from my Amstrad 6128, which I had on standby just in case I needed to verify good signals of a working system in this guy, and I just used them on it. So what we have is a 5-volt phone charger, more or less powering it at 2 amps, and I've got a cable I made up going to the SCART socket on the back of the TV here. And when I power on normally, this LED here should come on and I should get an image on screen. So I flick the switch. We know the switch is working because LED is after coming on. So the LED is working too, but we've got absolutely no image on screen. So there's a problem there somewhere. Now that's why I thought that there was a problem with maybe the video connector. When it got dropped, it's around the zone where the plastic was broken. But when I hit del, although the volume is up to the max, there is no sound out of it whatsoever. Now you may say, but maybe the speaker is broken too, but there was, or there still is, a little buzzing sound coming from the speaker when we lower or we raise the volume. We can hear that buzzing better. So the speaker is working. So there we are. So what we'll do is we'll take another look on the inside, and I'll show you the few little tests I went through to find this problem, and then I'll show you how I proved to myself that was the problem. Okay, so with the visual inspection done, the next thing that we do is we check for voltages on these boards. So we're pretty sure this isn't going to blow up when we power it on. So what I did was I reconnected the keyboard. Now, not the entire keyboard, but just the part of it connected to the switch so I could actually power on the unit. So with the unit powered on, I've got my little red LED that you can't actually see. It's out of shot here. But what I did do was I started checking to make sure the voltages on the system were more or less where they should be. So we know that coming in, there should be 5 volts. And when I checked that, we've got 4.96, 4.97 volts there, which shows that the switch is actually good. The next thing I did was I checked the voltage on the Z80 CPU here on pin 11. And on pin 11, what I had was 4.89 volts. So that looks to be good. There's no major voltage drop. It should be working. It's getting the voltages it should get. On these memory chips as well, I checked. So pin 8 on these is our 5-volt pin. And what I was getting was 4.9 volts on pretty much all of the pins. So we have 4.89 there, and run right the way across, they're pretty much all getting a voltage. So the voltage seems to be good on the system. Now, when we have that determined, and we know there's not a voltage problem or a short anywhere on the board potentially, the next thing to do is to check out the clock signals on the board to see that crystal is working right and that the timings are right so that all the chips can perform in unison the way they should. Here's my all new, all singing, all dancing little oscilloscope that Tron Magnum donated to the channel. And again, I thank him a million times because it was something I really needed, but I didn't realize how much I actually needed it. Now, this guy here is really great for checking clock signals. You can't actually do it with a multimeter. But just to show you, here on this chip, I should be getting a clock on pin 24 of the gate array here. But when I touch it with the scope, I'm not actually getting any discernible clock frequency. We've got a frequency here of 0 megahertz, and it's just a dirty kind of a signal on it. And as well on the CPU here, if we go to pin 6 of the CPU, which I actually have to find another ground point on the board to click into, but if I go to pin 6 of the CPU here, we've got pin 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. We've just got a high voltage on that. It goes from low to high, and that's all we have. We ain't got nothing else, so we don't actually have a clock on the board. Now, I had a little look around on the board here to see where the clock should be coming from, and quite obviously it should be coming from the crystal here. When I touch the crystal with the scope, I'm not getting anything either. I'm getting nothing at all. But I didn't know if I should actually be getting a signal by touching these, because I've got very little experience with this. So I pulled out the Amstrad 6128 to see what was happening with the crystals on that. Okay, so I'm after cracking my 6128 open. Here's the crystal. It should behave in exactly the same way as the one on the 464 that I have. So what we're going to do is we're going to touch our probe to one side of it. I know it's given exactly the same as the 464 did. On the other side of the crystal, and now this is different. Here we're getting a 16 megahertz signal. You can see the waveform there, and you can also see that it's displayed as frequency 16 megahertz, which means that the 464 has a problem in its clock circuit, probably to do with this guy here. Okay, so we've discovered that there is definitely a problem on this board as far as the clock goes, and the two main components of the clock are this crystal here, 16 megahertz one, as we saw in the 6128, and also this chip here, which is a 74HCU04, and this is a hex inverter. It's got 6 gates on it, which means that there are 6 inverters on this chip, and what it does is there's a pin that'll take in a signal, and then there's another pin that'll output the opposite of that signal. So if it takes in a high signal, it'll output a low one. If it takes in a low one, it'll output a high one. And what we have basically happening is that we've got a 16 megahertz signal coming from this into an input pin on this, and then the output pin is inverting that 16 megahertz signal and sending it back to pin 24 on the gate array here. But that isn't happening here. So I figured the problem is either this guy here or this guy here that's faulty, and most likely this one. So I've got a couple of 16 megahertz crystals lying around. Bought them ages back and had no use for them. So I decided I would replace this guy with one of those. And then I said to myself, no, hang on. In case it's that chip there, why go pulling this guy out? So I know that on the likes of the Acorn Electron, we can check for faulty memory by piggybacking another memory chip on top of an existing one, and that way we can find the faulty one. I wondered if I could piggyback my 16 megahertz crystal off this guy and see would it work. Let me show you what happened when I tried that. This here is my 16 megahertz crystal right here. And what I'm going to do with it is the 2 legs on it, I'm just going to touch them off the points on the board where this crystal connects. And I'm going to power on the Amstrad itself. So I'll just be touching these pretty much like this, holding them in place with my hand and powering on the system to see what happens. Okay, so let me show you. This here is, well, obviously it the way it was. When I power it on, leg comes on, we have nothing on screen at all. Power it off. When I put my 16 megahertz crystal in place, like this, and I power on, there we go. We got a working system. So this is just from piggybacking this guy on. You see, when I remove it, it stops. And when I put it back on, we've got an image on screen again. So that is proof positive that it is that 16 megahertz crystal that's causing the problems. Now, I haven't tested any further than that. I was happy to get it working that far. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to replace this crystal. And then what we'll do is we'll do some of the basic tests on the system and we'll see if it works the way it should or not. Now, so we're after removing this old guy here and we're after throwing in this new one, nice little small one. And I did it neat enough, I think. But anyway, what I thought I'd show you was the difference between this, the Schneider one, and the actual Amstrad board is all the shielding. Like I mentioned before, we've got this big wall around three sides of the board here that take the top shielding, and at the back what we have is we have this thick kind of aluminium sheet that's kind of kept in under the board, and then it's screwed in to the case with the board itself at 9 points. But they put an awful lot of shielding onto this thing. But anyway, there we go. What we'll do is we'll plug her all in and we'll see, does it work now with this new crystal in it or not? Okay, so it looks as though changing the crystal inside in the system is after doing the trick. Every time I power on now, I'm getting this blue screen, and when I press del, I've got a beep, which is exactly the way they should work. But we're still unsure as to whether the memory is good in the system and a few other bits and pieces. But thanks to Noel over at Noel's Retro Lab, it's actually quite easy to test that the innards of your CPC are working properly. And that's because he wrote a test suite of programs for the CPC line of computers that he called the Amstrad Diagnostics. And I'll put a link in the description as to where you can find any of the files to create your own cassette, your own disc, or a ROM that you can run off a ROM board like this one that I made a few years back. So in order to use it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to power down the system. I'm going to plug my ROM board into the floppy drive port on the back. And when I power on, it'll give me a few extra little options, but to run the diagnostic suite, I just type diag. And once I press enter, the very first thing it does, without me asking it to do anything really, is that it tests the 64K RAM inside in the system. So we see here that the lower RAM has passed. Now, if there was a problem with an IC, it'd flag and it'd tell me which IC was at fault so that I could easily change it out and rerun the tests again. So it makes testing RAM and fixing RAM problems quite easy. The other thing this program does right off the bat is it'll show us what model of CPC we have. So it's been reported as 464, which is right, and also the vendors. So here this is a Schneider system, so all this has been reported back correctly. The refresh rate is at 50 Hertz because this is a PAL system, so again that's right. We've got 64K RAM. The CRTC controller, or the graphics chip inside the system, is reported as being there and working, and it's saying that it doesn't have a floppy disk controller, so all that is right. Now, on top of that, we can run a few other tests. I can test the ROMs inside in the system. So there is the 464 main ROM, the boot ROM, I suppose, which is checked here and it's been reported back as being correct. And also we've got the basic ROM that contains the locomotive programming language that there is being tested and reporting back correctly. And this here, the Amstrad Diagnostics, is actually Noel's Amstrad Diagnostics ROM that I have in the ROM board here. All the ROMs that are being reported back is red here and unknown. They're not a problem. They're just being flagged because the Amstrad Diagnostics program doesn't recognize them. They're all the ones I have in here, more or less. When it's run through, I can press any key to go back to the main menu, and we see that everything is passed. The only things we have left to do now is to test the keyboard and the joystick. So I press K, and it shows me the keyboard layout that I have here on the screen. Now, depending on what type of system you're testing, this keyboard layout on screen will change. So it'll be different for the likes of a CPC464 or a 664. And what you do is you press all the keys to make sure that they're all working. There we go. And if they all come up yellow, it means your keys are working. Joystick equally, up, down, left and right. And our fire button has been seen as well. So we're after passing all the tests there. So basically what that means is that in the space of about 2 to 3 minutes, we're after testing everything on the inside of the system, and we can be pretty confident that the system is working correctly. We can also run soak tests if we want to let it run through the ROM and the memory tests for hours on end to make sure that there's no little niggly kind of problem that's maybe hidden a bit. But apart from that, I'm happy enough with this system. Now, there's still the data cassette here to test on this, but the video has gone way too long. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to test that off camera, and I'll let you know how I got on in the outro, which is coming up pretty much right now. Okay, so what did we learn in today's episode? Well, we learned that you can piggyback crystals, or at least in this case, you can. I had a look around on the internet, and they told me that basically the things that make crystals fail are heat Heat will reduce the life of a crystal significantly. And the other thing is a very hard physical shock, which I think we can all agree is exactly what happened to this system, looking at the plastics and the way it fell off the back of it. But there's also another little lesson to be learned from this, and that is that drinking and eBay really don't go well together. So I don't recommend that you do it, because I was only just lucky that it was an easy enough fix really in the end for this, and I could have been lumbered with a CPC464 that just I couldn't get working at all. But thankfully, thanks to piggybacking crystals and to Noel's diagnostic tests as well, I managed to get all this working well. So the other thing that I tried was the little tape recorder guy on this, and I'm happy to report back that without having to change any belts or clean anything, I managed to do two things. I got the Schneider computer software cassette that came with the system to run. I didn't have to do a thing, just try it, and it just worked. And what I managed to get to run was a little keyboard test program, or a little type and tutor type thing, I suppose, in German. So I also managed to learn a little bit of German while I was doing it, so I was happy with that. And the other thing I did, because I've got this guy here, which is one of those, you know, car cassette things that anciently let you kind of plug a CD player into your car stereo radio thing back in the 90s. I used that in conjunction with this little box here, which is like a Tapduino that I built up a while ago. And I managed to get this guy to run 1942. So I played a little bit of that as well. So all in all, the system is working great. So look, guys, that is it for this episode. It's an episode I didn't really intend on making, but I'm kind of glad that that it works the way it does. So I'll see you in a couple of weeks' time, again with an episode probably about Bob the Tentacled Hedgehoctopus, or writing a game about him. And until then, take very good care of yourselves, and we'll talk to you all very soon. Bye-bye.